Hey everybody, and welcome to the Oh Good God Pod. My name is Robbi Jan, and I have with me my beautiful co-host. This is Jen. So I'm gonna share with you guys my story. So here we go. Once upon a time, I was born in Australia. My dad is American, my mom's Australian. I have 5 siblings, 3 sisters, 2 brothers. And I was raised in a Christian household. So for me, it was, something I'd always grown up hearing about. I'd always heard, God created the world and all of these type of stories that you hear growing up, like Noah's Ark, all of those stories. Mary and Joseph, I didn't take it as my own. Like for me, I was like, it was just something I grew up with. I didn't take it that serious because to me, it wasn't that serious. It was just like a part of life, right? And then as I got older, I was 13. And I ended up doing an exchange year. So I actually came over to the US and I lived with my dad's brother, so my uncle, and my cousins. And that year ended up being the most pivotal, crazy year for me, I think, to this day of my whole life, because it changed everything for me. So I was 13 years old, living in a strange country for the first time, like being without my family. I was a very, very shy girl, like definitely a tomboy. I had grown up racing motocross. I was a sponsored racer. Like many people don't know that. I was a total tomboy, never shaved my legs, nothing. Like I was just such
look at you now.
Yeah, it's just, I don't know what happened. But something dramatic happened. So I'm living in California. And our house ended up burning down to the ground. So we lost everything. And that was a crazy moment for us, because unless you've experienced something like that, like you really know, it's like we put so much identity into like what we have, right? Yeah. So when you lose that, you're now not only am I on the other side of the world, like now I don't have like a home. So we end up moving into this hotel, which sounds like all very glamorous, but then it was like very close quarters. So I get an opportunity to go race out in the desert. It was a really cool opportunity. 30-foot trailer in the back full of motorbikes. We're going out to the desert. We're going down this hill. And this is the moment that changed my life forever. And basically we ended up getting into a crazy car crash. The trailer lifted up, jackknifed. We ended up flipping, skidding upside down. And we landed upside down. And there was this little girl like next to me. I remember getting her out and I'm just hanging there upside down. I fall to the ground, I unclip myself, and I crawl out of the car, and I'm just like adrenaline. Everyone's like, are you okay? And I'm like, I'm okay, I'm fine. I was not fine. Turns out I had actually broken my neck in 2 spots, C5 and C6, which if you know anything about anatomy, that's a very, very high fracture. So I remember like having this conversation with the doctors, and they were like, this is a medical miracle. You should not be walking. You should be a quadriplegic. And I'm like, I think that was the first time in my whole life that I've ever felt like blessed. I was like, my life kind of flashed before my eyes, and I was like, wow, like I could be in a very different situation. All of those little things you take for granted, like being able to walk, being able to run, like I shouldn't have been able to do any of that.
Yeah, it's not even that you're alive.
Yeah.
You're in perfect health, and that in itself is such a blessing.
That was the first time I think I was like, okay, God, like, wow, I really did have a guardian angel. Like maybe, maybe there is something bigger for my life. I didn't just break my neck. I ended up breaking basically everything. So I was in like a cast on my arm, like my legs, like I ended up breaking my nose after that. It was just like all of this stuff kind of ended up happening.
One thing after the other.
I had to go back to Australia. I ended up having to get both of my shoulders reconstructed because of all of the atrophy. Basically, all the muscles deteriorated from the neck being fractured. Got both of my shoulders reconstructed, and that feeling that I just explained to you of like feeling like joyful and blessed, like it kind of like transitioned to feeling like resentful, right? I was in so much physio and so much occupational therapy, and like I was in so much pain that I kind of like went from being like, oh, thank you God for like, like saving this part of my life, to being like, why me? Like it's not fair. And it's like an injury like that is not something you can just get over like that. It's something that you really have to rehab, and it affects your life in many ways. This is all while I was 13, by the way. And the other pivotal thing that happened during that year in California was I actually met a guy who was going to be my future husband. So he was 2 grades above me. I remember I was like a freshman, which is a grade 9. I was in grade 9. He was 2 grades above me. And I remember he was like, he was the quarterback. He was like tanned, beautiful, blue eyes. And I just remember like, he is so handsome. Anyway, I go back to Australia, like we stay friends on MySpace. All of the people that I met during those years, they're still some of my best friends. Like thankfully, like that is something incredible that came out of that season of my life. So I graduated high school, and my passion my whole life was dentistry. My dad is a dentist, and I had been a dental nurse. Like that was my traineeship during high school. And I knew, like, I was like, I want to do cosmetic dentistry. I want to own a practice. And I've always been like very business minded. Like that's always been something that's part of my journey and my story and my drive. So I got into school. I did a dual degree in oral health therapy and dental hygiene.
Amazing.
Crazy. And I ended up getting engaged to the guy that I had just told you about. And so we got engaged when I was 19. We didn't start dating seriously until I was like 17. Engaged at 19, married at 20.
Wow.
We got married in the US, and then I ended up bringing him over to Australia, paid for his visa. He wanted to be a mechanical engineer. I was like, I got you, paid for his whole education, which, you know, that's a huge deal when you're that age. I was working 3 jobs, doing a double degree, newly married, and he couldn't work because obviously he was there on a visa. So it was just a very complex situation. And for me, when I got married, I was like, really, this is my person. Like, this is your ride or die. You will do anything for your person. The money doesn't matter. The investment doesn't matter because that's your person. So I would never want to be married more than once. Like for me, that was it. You do anything for the person that you love. Like that's it. Turns out that was not the case. I ended up graduating, go to work with my dad. So he becomes my mentor in cosmetic dentistry. I ended up taking over his dental practice and basically building the practice through the use of social media, which many of you may not know. That's actually how I got into this job in the first place, was posting.
You always had that gift.
Before and afters of my patients, like fillings that I was doing, whitening. I took so much pride in that because I was like, if I could take a tooth out on a kid and they're laughing at the end of it, like that to me is like, that's a win.
Yeah.
You know, you're changing someone's whole perception of dental for their whole life. And like I really was so proud of that. During that time, I really just put a lot of my identity into my accomplishments. And you know, Robbi, who graduated at this age, has all these like degrees under her belt. I started doing another double degree in business and accounting. Also did like orofacial myology, cosmetic tattooing. Like for me, I'm like, I was always very driven by my accomplishments, and I wanted to achieve more and do more. And then, you know, that's my professional life, which is like going crazy, right? Like everything's great. I'm making so much money. It's so accomplished.
You're at the top of your game.
And then here on the other side, my personal life is just like falling apart, and I didn't even know to the degree, you know? So I graduated before he did. He was still at university. It turns out, it's a long story, and I don't ever really go into the dirty details just because to me, that's not what this is about. Like it's about, you know, how I came out of it and God's glory in the story. But basically he ended up having an affair, and it wasn't just a normal affair. It was a whole different life. And the way that I found out was like, it was devastating. Like it was devastating. This is the person that I've been with my whole life. And to be betrayed by that person, your best friend, like the person you're building a future and a life with, it shatters you, right? And I told you that like my identity was like Robbi, who was a wife, Robbi in dentistry, like Robbi, like that was my identity, right? So like when I found out about this, it was actually through my little brother, which was even more humiliating, right? So my little brother told me, he's like, hey Rob, like I think he's cheating on you. I heard the Tinder sound on his phone. So I talked to him about it. I was like, hey, is this true? Deny, like angry. And then I ended up, for the first time I've ever in any relationship, looked at his phone. Turns out like it wasn't just an affair, like it was a whole different life. Like it was everything, you know, everything you could imagine. Robs. So it ends up that he actually ends up marrying this girl 2 months after our divorce went through. So like adding insult to injury, he came for, you know, not only all of our money that we had in the joint account, which was like majority mine because I was working. He then also had separate bank accounts, which I didn't know that he was getting paid into. Like it was like, imagine this as a 24-year-old. Like your whole life just gets like flipped upside down. Like everything you know is not reality
and you
anymore.
Just have to keep going on top of that.
Keep going. And then he came for the money for my family's dental practice. Like it was just it was like betrayal and deception, and it was just so messy and so horrific. And I was so angry at him. I was so angry at God. I was like, God, I honored you. I married this man. I did it the right way. And like, why did you allow this, right? Like that level of anger, I mean, it penetrates everything, right? And the enemy, you almost become cynical. So I was angry at him. I was angry at my friends. I was angry at my family because nobody knew what to say to comfort me, because there's no comfort. Like nothing will make you feel better.
What do you do in that moment?
Like what do you say to somebody? Be like, oh, sorry, like your whole life is a lie.
You want to go for dinner?
Yeah. You want to go to the movies? Like, no, like there's nothing, right? So at this point, I just start running. And when I say running, I mean, I go to Europe for 3 months with my girlfriends, and I'm like, you know, I'm just like, I'm drowning myself myself in every single worldly thing, which for me is like I'm spending money, I'm having these crazy experiences, I'm traveling with my girlfriends, I'm like doing everything, but nothing is filling this hole.
You just want to keep moving so you don't stop and think about it.
And it's crazy. Like I look back at my Instagram and I'm like still posting all this stuff, like, and on the inside I'm like this shell. Like I'm anxious, I'm depressed, I'm like sitting down in the shower crying, and like nothing feels right, nothing feels real, everything feels fake. So then I'm like, okay, like I'm gonna try to get back to real life. I go back to my town, and we've sold the dental practice at this point, so I'm like, okay, like I'm gonna get a job at a different practice. Try to get a job, and I go in on my first day, and I'm like, this is just like, it's not gonna work. Like it just didn't feel right anymore to me.
It wasn't you anymore.
Dentistry felt like a version of me that didn't exist anymore. It felt like a different version of a life once lived. It felt like I was like recalling a memory of a friend or watching a movie. Like it just didn't feel like me. And there's something really devastating in that, because like now I'm like, I feel so lost in the world. And again, I'm just so angry at God. I'm so angry at everyone. And I was like, all right, I'm going to travel. So I was in this contract for 2 months, but I booked another trip back to the US to go to San Diego to see all my girlfriends that I met when I was 13. Turns out this guy slides in my DMs. We end up talking for those 2 months, and I tell him, I'm like, hey, I'm coming to the US. And we ended up, I flew into LA. Like I was meant to go to San Diego and never made it to San Diego. This was like my first like one night stand that turned into like over a 4-year relationship. And that is, you know, not something that I regret by any means. He's an incredible, incredible man, and we had an amazing relationship. And it ended up because of the pandemic that like I had never planned to move to the US, like ever. Like it just was not in the cards for me. My degree doesn't translate here. All my friends, all my family's in Australia. But like doors kind of kept opening, the pandemic hit, and then I was like extended, ended up staying in the US, 3 years in LA, a year in New York. And then, you know, it was just an incredible journey. It was just like, it was a different version of me. I just wanted anything that was the opposite of what I had experienced.
Because that didn't work before. So you're like, I'm going to do something else.
Exactly. And all during this time, like God still wasn't a part of my story. People are like, oh, like you're a Christian. I'm like, yeah, I'm a Christian. Like what I mean by that is like, it was like God was for me a crisis hotline. Like something bad would happen and I'd be like, God, like fix this for me. I would never like actually push through him. And to me, I'm like, what does it actually mean to be a Christian? Well, to be a Christian is like acknowledge, okay, like I'm saying that I think God created the world. Like what does that actually mean? Okay, well, that means that if Jesus came to die for my sins, that means that what he says is true, right? What he says cannot be wrong, which is like the word of the Bible, but I'm not living that out. I don't read the Bible. I don't actually do anything that's in it. I'm just living for myself, and like I'm accumulating all of this stuff on the outside that is again still making me feel like some form of empty, right? So then fast forward to start of last year, I just realized obviously our relationship was like very, very serious relationship. Like we're at the point where we're about to take our next steps.
Wow.
And you know, that's the dream, of course. Like, you know, part of my identity is like I've always wanted that family. Like that's so important. Like I want that family. I want those kids. Like I want to build my community and my team. You want to do life with your person, right?
Of course.
And that's always been something that's like been really, really heavy on my heart, that intention. And I just started feeling like something just isn't right. Like something's missing. Like what is it? And then I just realized I'm like, there is no God in this, right? And there's so many different aspects of life. There's the physical, but then there's also the spiritual. So if you can't connect on a spiritual level, then like what does that mean, right? And the thing that really shook me up was I had this fight one day. And the comment was made, you're a fake ass Christian.
Stop.
From someone who wasn't a Christian.
Ouch.
Yeah, my partner, right? So, and that comment, that like shook me up to my core.
It definitely stung a bit because you're like, who are you to tell me? And that makes it even worse.
And I just remember I went into the bathroom and I just like looked at myself and I didn't even recognize myself. And I'm like, but that's crazy, right? Like, I'm like, I have everything. I have like, my career is like doing better than ever. I'm making way more money than I was doing in dentistry. I have all these like things that I'm building up, these incredible friends, this dream apartment, this dream relationship. And I'm like, what's missing? Like fulfillment. But like, and then you almost like argue with yourself, right? But then when that comment was made, like it kind of snapped. I was like, wow, like I'm a hypocrite. Like I'm saying that I love God. I'm saying that I'm a Christian, but here I am like living out a life that actually isn't that at all, right? So anyway, I'm sitting there, like fast forward like a week, everything's fine. I'm watching this video, and it's from a speaker called Lisa Turcrost.
Love her.
She's an amazing
Love
speaker.
her.
She actually went through a very similar experience to me. She was married, he had an affair. She talked about her healing journey, and I was like, this woman is boss. Like, look at her go. And then I saw underneath that little ad that came up, and basically it was speaking to the fact that she was going to be speaking that following weekend at a conference in Oklahoma, which is like nowhere near New York. Like, it was a far flight. I look up flights. It was like $700, and I was like,
Let's go to Oklahoma.
In Oklahoma, I'm like, why in the world would I want to go to Oklahoma to go to this conference? That's like a couple $100s. So in my head, I'm like, okay, so it's gonna be like $700 in flights. It's gonna be like $200 for the conference. Like, get there. Like, what? Like, why would I do that? Then to add insult to injury, I had an amazing opportunity that weekend to go to the Sia concert, and then I had an amazing deal come up. So in my head, I'm like, I feel like I'm called to go to this. But then on the other side now, I'm like, I'm getting offered something that's like incredible. Like, how do you say no to that? How do you walk away from that? And in my head, I'm like, all right, God, well, like, I've tried it my way. I'm going to try it your way for once. But it wasn't out of a place of like joyful obedience. It was like, what are you going to do for me,
Your
God?
move
Like,
next.
I'm like, your move. Like, if I do this, like, look what I'm giving up. What are you going to do for me? That's how it was.
But you know what? His grace is sufficient, and he is so merciful that even in that, your sassy attitude, there's a blessing in obedience. And he was like, okay, Robbi.
And that was a
my
big
move
lesson.
next.
That was a big lesson for me to learn. So I end up getting my grandma and her best friend a ticket as well. They meet me in Oklahoma. We show up, we're in this like random little hotel. Someone's speaking and she's talking, and I just like felt convicted. Like, I'm like, I knew on my heart like what I needed to do, but I knew that in doing that I would break my own heart and I would shatter my reality. And there's so much fear in that, because it's like when you walk away from something secure, like, what are you walking towards to? Like, you know, where are you going?
You
like,
don't even know what you're giving it up
right?
for.
And fear speaks to you.
grips
This
you.
fear gripped me in every capacity. And I just remember, like, part of it was like, I'm so determined to like build a life with somebody and share my life with somebody that, like, if I end this and like walk away, then I'm going to literally be like so much further from having kids and all of these things that I really care about. And I just had like tears like just streaming down my face, and it was devastating. I'm like, I can't lose love again. Like, I can't start again. Like, what do I do? Do I go back to Australia? Do I stay in the US? Like, do I go back to dentistry? Like, everything was like just like thoughts. And for the first time, like, I just felt like everything was falling apart again. And that same feeling that 24-year-old Robbi had, like sitting on the shower crying, like I felt that all over. And then this lady goes on the stage at this conference and she starts talking about compassion. So Compassion International is an amazing organization that supports children in poverty, and it's a Christian organization. They share Jesus with the world. It's incredible. So at this point, she's talking about it, and I was like, oh, like, you know, I was crying, like thinking like, oh, I'm not gonna have a kid. And I just felt like God on my heart saying like, you can have a kid. Like, here, she's talking about like sponsoring a kid. So I'm like, okay, like growing up, like my family, we all had a compassion kid growing up. So we'd write them letters. So for me, like, it made sense.
That's so sweet.
And I was like, okay, so I go to sign up. It was like, I think like $39 or $49 for a kid. And I was like, okay, so I chose a kid from Bali or Indonesia. So Indonesia is super close to Australia. I spend a lot of time there. I get there, sign up for the kid, and I just felt God say like 20. And I was like,
20.
I was like, come on. Like, I was like, come
Are
on.
you
Like,
being
I'm in
for real
Oklahoma.
right now?
I'm in Oklahoma. Why do I want 20 kids? Like, why?
That
So anyway,
conviction.
so I was like, again, that same thought. I was like, oh my God, like, oh.
Okay, I'm gonna do it.
I listened to you. Like, here we are. Like, what else do I have to lose? In my head, I was like, if I don't like it, I'll just cancel it. Whatever. That's
I love the
literally
truth.
the attitude that I had. So I sign up for the 20 kids, and my grandma's with me. And my grandma's like, I've talked about her many times. She's the
We
most
love grandma.
joyful, incredible person. I'm named after her. She's my biggest rock, my biggest inspiration, and the most God-fearing, like kind, classy woman that I've ever met. So she's there. She's like rooting for me. She was like, my granddaughter just signed up for 20 sponsor kids. And she's like talking, she's saying that to the lady who was on the stage talking about it.
Oh, wow.
Turns out this lady is, she's a speaker, author, businesswoman,
No
very
way.
incredible woman. And this lady comes up to me and she's like, that's incredible that you just did that. Like, wow, what a generous heart. Like in my head, I'm like, generous. I'm like, yeah, man. Like, you know, so she ends up like, she's signing her book. She gives me a copy of her book and she's like, hey, I wrote down my email in the book. If you ever need anything, reach out.
Aw.
Fast forward, I'm like, whatever. I leave, I go back to New York, and again, I'm still like grappled with this conviction. I'm like saying that I'm living out something, but I'm not living it out. So it puts you into this crazy equilibrium, and like you're at war with yourself. There's no peace to be had when that's the case, right?
That's very true.
So again, I'm like, well, what do I do? So I ended up, it was like a couple months, maybe a couple months later, I don't know. It wasn't that long. I end up reading this book, and I see her email. So I'm like, okay, I'm gonna shoot her an email. Ooh. And I was like, hey, this is Robbi. Like, you probably don't remember me. I met you. She replied straight away. And she's like, hey, I do remember you. She's like, when we left the conference, I actually said to my husband, that girl is going to be a part of my life, and I don't know why.
Look at God.
So she becomes my mentor. So she is like a huge part of my story and how I was actually able to have the strength to do what I did. The bravery that came from God, and the strength that isn't our own, like our strength isn't enough. Like life is too hard to do by ourselves. And, you know, the more I started like leaning into God and like into his word and what he said and who he said that I am, with the help of the right people around me, I was able to have the strength to move. And I felt really called to come to Miami. I had 2 businesses that were already based out of here, so it made sense on all aspects. Like, I love the beach. I'm a beach baby. Financially, like, my businesses were here. Like, it just made sense. So I was like, okay, moved to Miami. I'm in this hotel, and I went and looked at nearly 20 different places. Like, nowhere felt like home because nothing felt right. Like, I was nearly 5 years older than I was when I went through everything, and here I am alone, starting again. Like, it's devastating, right? And it's a scary feeling. And I'm like, what do I do? Like, where do I go? Like, now not only am I walking through this same heartbreak, like now I'm doing it by myself, because at least in Australia, I had my friends, I had my family, I had my dog. Here, I'm literally by myself. Like, and anyway, it was just a really, really hard season. And that was really the first time that I felt like the real tangible presence of God and a peace that surpassed any human understanding. And I just felt his presence. And I feel like for me, I just kept running from him for so long. I'm a person that needs receipts. I'm like, okay, like, show me the receipts. Like, I'm stubborn, right? But he kept pursuing me. And at some point I couldn't ignore it anymore.
You couldn't deny that you weren't alone. It was you and God.
Yeah. And he had been there all along, and I had just chosen not to see him because I was so focused on what was going on. And there's a verse, there's Matthew 18 and Luke 15. Basically, it's a parable where it talks about these sheep, right? There's a shepherd and there's 99 sheep.
I love this one.
And there's one sheep that goes astray, and the shepherd leaves his 99 sheep and he chases that one. And I really feel like I was that one, because no matter how far I went, no matter changing careers, moving across the world, like every single part of me that was different, like he was still there. And I just like started praying. I was like, all right, God, like if you're real, like just reveal yourself to me. Like if you're real, like fill these broken parts of my heart, because nothing else is gonna hold me together.
That's such a beautiful prayer, because he always answers that.
Yeah. Like nothing else will hold me together. And over this last year, so many things have changed, and I'm not where I thought I would be at this age. But at the same time, I'm like, I have something that I've been looking for my whole life. And that wasn't found in another person. That wasn't found in a relationship. That wasn't found in a certain amount of money in my bank account, or a certain amount of properties or businesses or whatever it was. Like that was found only in God and who he says that I am.
And your real identity.
My real identity, right? Like Robbi stripped all of that stuff away. There's obviously a lot more that has like happened this year, but that's like really my testimony and how I got to where I am. And like, you know, things are slowly figuring themselves out. And I'm just taking like step after step in faith. And I don't know what my future looks like. None of us do. But all I know is that I'm genuinely excited for where it's going. And
there's so much in store for you, so much purpose in your pain. He's brought you this far, and I'm excited for your future. I really am.
Yeah, and he's so good. You know, he can take a bad situation. I mean, that's what he does. Like, he's the master. He takes something bad and he works it for good. Even when we walk away, even when we ignore him, even when we feel something in our life that we ignore. And I feel like that's my biggest lesson out of all of this is like, if you feel a conviction on your life, like some people say it's like gut instinct, some people say it's their intuition, I say it's the Holy Spirit. Definitely. If you feel that, like, don't ignore it, because those things, like those things in the Bible that I used to think were like religion and annoying, like really, truly, like they're only there to protect you. And all of the pain that I've had in my life all comes from when I chose to ignore that.
And as you mature, you realize that the rules are really just a guideline for a good life.
Yeah. So that's a little bit of my story.
I'm so proud of you.